تغيرون اختيار اللغة. Also at the bottom bar of your Zoom screen, you're going to see the Q&A tab. So anytime throughout the session, feel free to drop us your questions, and we'll try to get to as much of them as we can towards the end. You can also find us on YouTube. So if someone would like to watch the session on their own pace, then go to Shuruq's channel, which is Shuruq SHJ, and share it as well with your friends. So most likely, I think the earliest bridges were probably fallen trees and stepping stones, and they eventually became the symbol of a country's level of engineering, and started evolving into masterpieces. Bridges do not merely resemble connectivity. They are means to economic growth, social inclusivity, and even in some cases, ecological prosperity. So with us here to discuss bridging the gap, I would like to welcome Mr. Cristiano Ceccato, Director at Zaha Hadid Architects, Mr. Marijn Schenk, co-founder and architect at Next Architects, and Mr. Bart Reuser, associate at Night Architects. So thank you all for joining us in this session. And honestly, there's a lot to learn when it comes to bridges. I'm an architect. I've never been into infrastructure design. And for the sake of this session, I researched a lot about bridges and realized they're actually very interesting structures. So just before we delve right in, if you can all briefly introduce yourself and your work to the audience. So maybe Cristiano, we can start with you.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be back in the UAE, even though I'm only there virtually. But last time I visited, it was wonderful. So thank you for having me and hosting this event, and to my colleague Nesma for arranging. Yeah, I mean, I have prepared some images. I don't know if you want me to just explain a few things or show a few things. It's kind of up to you.
We can maybe, once we get to like the questions or so, you can show us a few things.
So briefly, just about, as you mentioned, I'm a director here at ZHA. Previously worked for Frank Gehry in LA, where we also co-founded a technology company called Gehry Technologies. Mm-hmm. A lot of my work has been here, not on one side on the kind of design and construction of complex form, and working a lot with computers. I have degrees in computer science as well. And on the other side, also developing part of the infrastructure sector, particularly in the aviation business. So we've been building a number of airports around the world, and also in the bridge sector, where we are now working or starting construction now on a very long span cable stay bridge in Taiwan. The office has done a couple of other bridge projects before. So yeah, the office's repertoire is basically growing in that direction. It's much more engineering based and kind of functional based, having originally grown from kind of a civic and kind of public arts background as a firm.
Great, thank you for joining us. So moving to Marijn.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for having me here. Great to be on this panel talking about our work. I'm a founding partner of Next Architects already 20 years ago. I started with 3 other partners, a firm in Amsterdam, architecture firm, which developed into actually two branch firms, one in Amsterdam and one in Beijing, where our partner John van der Water is running the Chinese firm. And me and 2 of the other partners are running the firm in Amsterdam. We are working quite a broad field of work, from actually town planning, architecture, and infrastructure. Infrastructure is, I think, more or less 1/3 of our field of work, and especially the sort of iconic bridges are, well, something that we like to work a lot on, like the one you see in my back over here. That's the bridge in Purmerend, the Melkwegbrug. And now saying to my son who's walking in the kitchen to be quiet. Sam, even stil graag. Sorry for that. That's the inconvenience of...
Yeah. I mean, inconvenience and actually like real the experience.
Real life working from the kitchen. But we did a Lucky Nut Bridge in Sharjah in China. And actually at the moment we are working together with Martin Knight Architects for a highway in the Netherlands. So the infrastructure is from small-scale bridges to actually complete highways, including aqueducts, ecoducts, bicycle bridges, everything that goes with that large-scale infrastructure.
Great. I have a lot to ask you about a lot of your projects. So Bart, if you may.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Bart Reuser. I'm an associate at Knight Architects. I've been with the company for the last 13 years. Knight Architects exists since 2006, and we specialize exclusively in bridge and infrastructure design. I'm an engineer, a structural engineer and architect, but I've been working mainly in the field of architecture. Our focus goes into bridges, so I would say 90% of the structures that of the objects that we have designed were bridges, which vary from in size between small footbridges to large infrastructure projects like the Mersey Gateway or the even railway corridors like the HS2 in the UK, which is the largest infrastructure project currently in Europe. We believe that bridges are very important architecture objects. Each of them by itself is already a landmark, if you want to call it like that. And as soon as bridges are finished, they add architectural value. So whatever the engineering view at a structure, which is always challenging, is we try to set the focus for the people who use the bridge, to set that focus into the designer's mind and ensure that both the users but also people who live nearby and will be living with the bridges for the next 120 years, that they enjoy those bridges.
That's great to hear. So just jumping right in, my first question would be to both Cristiano and Bart, because I'd like to know if there's any difference between an architect who works on different types of buildings and structures versus an architect and structural engineer that's more specialized in bridge design. So bridges, they vary in forms and types, and you have the cable-stayed, suspension bridge, cantilever bridge, and a lot more. So when designing a bridge that is aspiring to be a landmark, what are the different factors that determine the type of the bridge the architect or engineer would go for? Is there any certain factors such as cost or the span, or like what are all these different elements? Bart, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we design, we usually ask 4 questions, and the world has been subdivided into the field of the architects and the engineers, and these fields now slowly grow back together, or at least tend towards each other. But for a very long time, bridges were an engineering domain, whereas where the engineers preferred not to have an architect on board, worried that they will decorate the bridge. And we look at the purity of a structure and the elegance. So and ideally this should drive the design and its appearance. So when going back, we tend to ask the question, what kind of structure should it be? And that depends on external factors like span, location, accessibility, budget. but also how it's going to be built. So these are usually questions being asked by the structural engineers, where we try to get into the discussion is by asking the more philosophical questions. Why do you need the bridge there in the first place? And who is this bridge for? And quite often that answering to those questions will change the appearance of the bridge, because these questions have not been asked before.
So, Cristiano, would you agree that, you know, when it comes to bridge design, it starts with the structural engineer, or is it the architect that takes the lead?
Maybe I can answer that with a couple of images, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because I think the images speak louder than words. So hopefully you can see that. Because actually there was a number of different questions in your question.
Oh, that's a beautiful one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a number of different questions in your question, and this here is such an example. This is the one we're building in Taiwan. This one it started from day one as a collaboration between ourselves and two engineers. One was an engineering partner in Taiwan, and the other one was a design engineer that we worked with in Germany, which is a very famous engineering company called LAP, Leonhard Andre and Partners, which basically only design bridges. And it was clear, because of this image that you see here, even better this one, that it had to be, I don't really like the word iconic, but it had to frame a certain particular cultural context, because this bridge is located at the end of the Tamsui River, north of Taipei in Taiwan, so where it meets the sea. And to get from one side to the other, you'd have to drive down in an hour and then across and then back up. And so this bridge cuts out, you know, a good hour and a half of travel between the two sides. But there's kind of a series of islands in the background, and there's this famous sunset that happens there, which is very, very famous in Taiwan. And this is the kind of location where people go in the evening after work, where they hang out, they have their family walks. It's where somebody will go ask their loved one to marry them. It's something that people were very worried that a bridge would destroy this view of the sunset into the Tamsui River. And so by working in this case, with looking at where the sunset was, working with a single mast bridge, it had a couple advantages. One is that it would complement the sunset. And the other one was, of course, that from a commercial point of view, building one tower is, of course, a lot cheaper than building two. The challenge here was that we have a seismically very sensitive location in Taiwan. We have a lot of earthquakes. And to having only one tower meant that you had a lot of asymmetrical kind of resonance in the structural calculation. So it was something that the structural engineer, LAP, felt confident enough to propose that it would actually work, because we had to demonstrate to the client that this would not be, you know, a technical challenge, but it would actually be possible to achieve. And this is something that went downstream in the engineering side, which has to do with when you're looking at complex forms, you have to think about, you know, a real collaboration between the engineer and the architect. So you're working very closely in terms of translating ideas from three-dimensional design into constructible form, looking at how you're going to be building a particular shape that is sculpted out of concrete, that has different permutations to it, where it's going from sort of a convex to a concave shape as you rise up. How do you build that efficiently and still manage to build that at the same speed and with the same capability that if it was just a standard straight piece? So to do that, in this case, because it was concrete, we worked with variable geometry formwork, which basically changes its shape as it goes up. It's something that we can simulate in the computer, right down to the individual pieces of rebar, which is something that is really required in order to provide the level of confidence to the authorities that what you're actually planning is something that you can actually ultimately execute. including then a bilateral symmetrical suspension system for the assembly. So what I'm trying to say here is that I'm a big fan of collaboration because it gives you the possibility of confronting ideas that would otherwise remain sterile or misinformed, either on the engineering side or from the architect side, would just remain kind of a fantasy. And if you bring those two things together, then you can actually achieve a kind of a poetic effect of movement, of dynamism, that maybe would not be as possible for me as an architect, without the input of engineer, and for an engineer perhaps to kind of think out of the box, unless they're working with architects. So this was a real engineering architect collaboration. They actually happened at the same time from day one. It was not really something that was sort of a bolt-on or an afterthought, but really started from the very beginning.
Very beautiful. And just like Bart was saying, it used to be like a war between the architect and the engineer. It was something, I don't know, neither one would want to give the other a chance. And it's beautiful to see what collaboration could do and the results of it. So this is a really great project to showcase that.
To add to that, I personally have the feeling that as you mentioned, I think calling it a war is a little bit of a harsh word. There was always very fruitful collaboration between engineers and architects, and probably the most beautiful structures in the world came out of these collaborations. And I think this is only right now, with an increasing complexity in technology, we are all forced to work back together, because each discipline on its own cannot survive.
War might be a harsh word, but there was definitely a frustration. So Marijn, looking at several projects, bridge projects in specific, that Next Architects have designed, you can sense a deliberate approach to creating a more intimate relationship between the bridge and the user. So in the case of I'm not sure if I'll pronounce it right, Zalche Bridge? Maybe not.
Yes.
You maintain the notion of a flood by creating the bridge, which is only accessible in certain times of the year. So what's the main idea behind it? And does that result in a challenge due to limited accessibility?
Well, the Zalige actually means blessed. It's the blessed bridge, not because the bridge is blessed, but because of the road which is the connection the bridge makes was called the blessed road. Let me share also some pictures. I think that's this is actually a rendering we made for the bridge in very high water. You have to know that the Netherlands actually is the drainage point of Europe. We are under sea level, so all the rivers of Europe come to the sea in the Netherlands, and so we have these situations where actually the large parts of the area are being flooded. It's not an incident, it's on purpose. They designated several areas to be flooded areas, but the condition is also that these areas can be also very dry. So there's a high, enormous level of up and down going water, but the water is continuing rising, so they mark certain areas in the Netherlands to give the water more area. The point over here, they moved the dike from the green line to the red line, creating a bypass, and the bypass can accommodate a large amount of water, can become very dry, almost without water, and it can be completely flooded. This is actually the bridge we made, and the conditions were that at the moment the water is that high, you cannot cross anymore, and at the moment the water is very low, the bridge is partly crossing the land. So we thought it would be very nice, this is not a bridge, but there was a reference images to make a bridge where you really make use of the presence of the water. So we wanted to make that idea very strong, to show with this bridge the conditions. So this is the area under construction, and this is the area at the first moment of rising water. Here you see it at a low tide moment where actually people are jumping from it, biking on it, becomes a sort of recreation landscape in itself. Here you see the bridge continuing over the land, and here you see the stepping stones. And we thought it would be great when the water is rising that with these elements like these stepping stones, still some parts of the bridge can be used. Like on this image, the bridge is for a great part already under the water. But through the stepping stones, people can still make use of the connection in itself. And by introducing these kind of elements, we sort of demonstrated the impact of the rising water in the Netherlands. So this image actually became quite an iconic image to talk about how in the Netherlands we have to deal with the water coming once in a while in our country.
Mm. Looking at these photos, I'm now thinking, did you consider water level rise? As in due to, the environmental issues that we're going through, the fact that water levels could keep on rising in the future. Does that mean this bridge could not be seen in one day?
Well, actually, that could happen, that at a certain moment the bridge is completely covered by the water. Actually, what we wanted to do in this bridge to show that we're no longer at the moment that we have to prevent water and to block the water, but we actually have to embrace it, because blocking water doesn't work anymore. Then we should make dike everywhere. So we should embrace the water and see the qualities. And therefore, this area it added actually a large amount of recreational area to the city of Nijmegen, which you see in the back. So they used the backside. Creating space for the water to benefit for the people living there, to create places for recreation, sports, leisure.
Mm-hmm. So based on these beautiful concepts of not just merely, having a bridge, but actually making it more in tune with the context and the environment, Bart, your portfolio also shows that the bridges that you prefer designing, they extend beyond connectivity and further into some ideals of improving economy, engaging the communities, and creating sustainable design. So can you elaborate on these principles and others as well by discussing maybe a project or two of yours that showcase this tale of empowerment, inclusivity, resilience?
Yes, absolutely. I just struggle with opening the presentation right now. Okay, there we go. Let me. Right. I can show you a couple of projects. I think the most recent one, which ties in straight into Marijn's topic, is the new Pooley Bridge, which is. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Now I can.
Now we go. Right, which is the new Pooley Bridge in Cumbria. Mm-hmm. It's a replacement bridge for a beautiful little stone bridge that comprised 3 arches that was sadly washed away in one of the increasing floods in 2016. So not only in the Netherlands, also the UK faces an increasing threat of floods, less coming from the sea, but coming from severe weather conditions, which increase river levels very, very quickly. So this was a major drama in the community of Pooley, because it was the only link within the town connecting the 2 shores without taking an hour and a half route around. Also, the bridge was one of the representative element. So there many people's hearts started to bleed once the bridge was destroyed. When it came to reintroduce, to build a new bridge, there were, from the side of the public, there were a lot of very strong opinions on what they wanted to have. So one side wanted to have a bridge that resembles exactly the original, whereas other people wanted something modern. And so our task was to design something that resembles the original bridge in a particular way, but also appears modern, which is a very, very difficult balance act to do. But talking about resilience, we also need to ensure that future floods, which will certainly be coming, will not be a problem to that bridge. Eventually, we opened that bridge in this year, actually a couple of weeks ago, and the specialties of it is, first of all, we don't have the two piers in the water, so the floodplain is completely open. The bridge is made of stainless steel, so it can be flooded, it can get underwater without facing the issue of corrosion. But also the open spandrels make a reference to old Victorian bridges. And most importantly, everything was being done and designed by constant public scrutiny. So we had a number of public presentations and discussions with the public on how the bridge should look like. And it ended up with this beautiful structure. And I don't have the picture right now here, but people leaving engraving their names. So people who donate to the bridge engrave the names in the footplates on the pedestrian deck. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of approaching these questions. The other way is talking about sustainability, and that's a topic that is becoming very urgent at the moment. We talk global change, so not only flooding will be a problem, global heating will be a problem, and the question of having a carbon sink is essential. In Germany, there is currently a renaissance of timber bridges, and this is a design that we won a competition in Vienna 10 years ago, which sadly has not yet come into construction. However, many similar types of structure where timber as a natural carbon sink is being used for footbridges, but also for bigger bridges, in order to massively reduce the carbon footprint of bridges, which the building industry is a major contributor to.
And that's really beautiful. And I absolutely loved in the Pulley Bridge that you've shared how you managed to save part of the existing original bridge and then connected it with a new modern bridge. You're respecting what was and then adding to it. So that's a really beautiful element.
Well, that comes back to the question of why is it needed and who is it for, which are, I think, the two most important questions for every architect before they start designing, but also especially in collaboration with engineers, where the focus way too quickly goes towards what is the problem and how can we solve it. Mm-hmm. So we could have delivered a much simpler solution, which would not be pretty, and then face the anger of the locals, of the local public, who will then have to live with that bridge for the next 100, 120 or even longer years.
Mm-hmm. It's great that you're considering the community. Cristiano, I wanted to know, we've discussed this a bit, the collaboration between the architect and the structural engineer, but how does the process of designing a bridge differ from a building for the architect? Maybe we can discuss the Sheikh Zayed Bridge in Abu Dhabi that Zaha has worked on, and does the shape again, or the vision for how it's going to look like, begin with the architect, similar to when designing buildings, and then looking at structure, or is it coming together at the same time? How is it exactly?
Well, maybe I can show you something here if you want to.
Bart, maybe you can stop sharing.
Yes.
Just something that kind of so see some of these bridges. Let me just give you a couple of examples. This one is one we did in Spain, which is a very different kind of bridge because it's an inhabited bridge. In Zaragoza, it's part of a pavilion for the expo in Zaragoza in 2008, and it's a bridge that isn't. It spans the river Ebro, but it's not actually, shall we say, primarily driven by issues of long span design. So it's actually closer, say, to what was, if you know the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, or if you know, what used to be, well, hundreds of years ago, London Bridge in London, which was an inhabited bridge. It's closer to that in terms of its function. So there's a kind of an architectural program that is overlaid on this. Same thing for Sheikh Zayed. It's not a bridge that is driven primarily by its span conditions, and it's more driven by, because the span here relatively mild.
Yeah.
But it's driven more also by kind of its architectural expression. Both in the daytime that you see here, you have this kind of very sleek horizontal plane, and then it's kind of interwoven by these kind of ripples, these large kind of wave-like structures. And then also the kind of the appearance that it has at night, which is completely different. So something also to bear in mind, which we also did on the project in Taiwan that I showed before, is that each of these structures expresses itself very differently at different times of day, right? And you have different kinds of people moving through it. Also people probably in Abu Dhabi spend more time driving across it than they will do walking because of the environment, the temperatures, and also where it's located, which is the exact opposite. For example, the one in Zaragoza, which actually, you can't drive across it, but actually people spend their time in it because of the kind of the galleries and the different exhibitions that are happening actually within the bridge. So in that sense, the one in Taiwan is sort of in between, because it's people who actually cross it either with a light rail or by car. But also what we provided is, okay, this is just from some of the detailing, but we actually provided a series of locations on either side of the bridge where people can actually stop, where we provided street furniture, where people can now enjoy that view that I mentioned before, not just from the side of the river, from the bridge itself. So you have to think about, I think, how the bridge will be used, and then provide an opportunity, I think, for kind of human beings to, in a certain sense, appropriate the building, that they can take over it by going there, by visiting it, and by making it their own. And if that happens, then it really becomes part of the urban fabric that people know, because they get to know it, they get to love it, they get to, it gets to have a meaning for them. It's not just like a new sort of abstract object that parachuted in there, but it's somewhere where I can actually go and, maybe I have a nice memory there,
Yeah, exactly. And I may be biased, but the Sheikh Zayed Bridge is actually one of my favorites. And every time I drive through, like, you don't walk, just like you said, so it might not be like a very long sort of memorable moment, but it's definitely memorable. It's definitely something that I enjoy doing, like deliberately. If I'm going to Abu Dhabi, this is where I'm going to go. through. So it's really nice to see such projects.
Good.
Marijn, so I wanted to talk a bit about how bridges in a lot of your projects, they don't just link communities and provide gateways to cities, but Next Architects also managed to turn one into a habitat for bats, actually. So talk to us a bit more about this bat bridge, and how did the idea come about, and what exactly did you have to consider during design and even construction to make sure it lives up to its name?
Yes, I'm sure I'd like to tell you about that. This is also a very typical image of the Netherlands. Once you have flown into Schiphol, the national airport, you might have seen all the glass houses everywhere, especially in the night when they all lit up. That's where all the tomatoes of Europe are growing, and the flowers. But you can imagine that the impact of all these glass houses and all the light on nature is quite big, especially on all the ecosystems that used to be part of this area. So in order to compensate the impact on nature, the question was to develop a sort of landscape zone, a habitat for all different kind of animals in this area. This was the original images where you see that the glass houses are almost on the edge of the water. So the main design that was done by Lola Landscape, the Dutch landscape firm, was to create a sort of natural zone within this landscape of glass houses. And part of this natural zone is a route, which is for bikes and pedestrians going through all these natural areas. And at the end, at the exit, there's a bridge. And we were invited to develop a design for the bridge. So we thought, when the whole landscape is based on the idea to accommodate all different kind of animals, maybe the bridge should add to that story. So can we make a bridge that's not only making a connection for the humans, which are already interfering in the area that much, but also introducing a sort of beneficial quality for the nature itself. This is the area seen from above. So you see fish ponds, there are houses for birds, prey birds, but not yet for bats. And we know that bats like bridges. This is a fantastic bridge in Austin in the US where the bats are there every night. So we thought maybe we can make a bridge which is more than it is a connection. It's also a sort of habitat for bats in all different types. So we made actually a winter house where you can enter here. They are in the concrete base of the bridge where the temperature during winter is not that cold, so they can stay there over the winter. And we used the whole bottom of the bridge to create a sort of here you see this house for the bats in the winter time, and on the bottom we created a habitat during the summer. So the whole concrete bottom of the bridge has these little incisions. And some of them are deeper, and they house the bats. So actually it works. They did some tests. It took about 1.5 years for the first bats to move to the bridge, but now it's also known in the area as the bat bridge.
Is there any maintenance that needs to be done?
They don't want to do it because when you have the winter house, which is over here. They have to create their own natural habitat, so it's not good for humans to interfere there, and actually you cannot enter.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Enter. Yeah.
Okay. Super interesting.
Yeah.
I like the approach, honestly. The fact that you considered the living creatures other than humans is really interesting. So
I love it.
Talking a bit more about the future, Bart, what's the future of bridges? Are there any big changes to be expected in the upcoming years with regards to materiality, maybe like technology, even sustainability, social sustainability, even.
Well, I think you have named it, social sustainability. We're just coming to the end of 2020, which is a year that has proven us a lot of things that we couldn't predict and were quite wrong in the past about. And one of these items is how quickly change in social mobility, change in mobility can occur. And let me just share my screen very quickly. This is a structure that we've just opened, that was opened in 2018, and it's a steel bridge crossing a railway line, which was mainly designed for a tram, but what you can see here as wide zones for pedestrians and cyclists, including benches for people to sit down and rest. So I agree with Cristiano here on the question of placemaking, making the bridge a destination. But it reflects a more important trend, is the switch of people from cars to public transport, or even to bicycles and walking on foot. So making these bridges more attractive for this kind of traffic is very important, and might be paramount in the years to come, where cities will start shrinking. More people will be working from home, and suddenly they will rely on a more enjoyable environment to walk along. Also, at the same time, we've got the question of self-driving cars, a reduction or maybe an increase of general traffic. We can't predict it very, very well. And this will all have an impact on bridge design codes. So will we in 10 years time, will we still designing bridge railings for the impact of a car if they're all self-driving, if there's not the issue of someone getting off the road accidentally? So I think that will affect how we design bridges and how the use of the bridges will change over time. I think that's one direction. The other direction is obviously materiality. So I've shown the timber bridge. So reducing carbon footprint will be paramount in future. It will be probably one of the driving concepts for future bridge design. And there will be the question of bridge construction and new materials. So talking about bridge construction, there have been already the first prototypes of 3D printed bridges. There are experiments on concrete pouring robots, which then could layer concrete to reduce the weight of the structure. And we also mustn't forget the option of fiber reinforced plastics. So we currently, unfortunately, I can't show the picture yet, but we're currently working on the first carbon reinforced plastic bridge for the network rail in the UK, and we're working currently on the prototype. And once that will be introduced, you look at reduced maintenance, reduce weight, and by that also reduce materiality.
Definitely something to look forward to.
Yeah, there's been other. I think I can't remember who it was in the Netherlands. I don't think it was you, Marijn, but there was some people who made a 3D printed bridge out of steel. Or there was a sintered bridge. Also, I've seen another one that was made of 3D printed concrete. Or you can there's a lot of very thin. I mean, if you look at the history of bridge making, if you go back to Robert Maillard, and thin, long span bridges. Actually, where I grew up, where I was in school, there was a very thin one in Switzerland. It happened to be by him, and it was we take these things for granted now, but even back then, the way you worked in concrete, and to be able to increase this kind of span was something quite unique. I just wanted to point out another point. You talked about social sustainability, which I think is really good, about the idea of connecting also places that are otherwise disconnected. You have a lot of conditions in cities. For example, where I live in London, there's part of it that where there's a big kind of expressway that goes through that really cuts two parts of the cities in half, and there's only one place that you can cross. And although these two parts of the city are so close together, they could not. It really is like the Berlin Wall. It's like a river with no connection, but it's actually more brutal than that, because while a river is inclusive and you can go on it like a canal, this is really like it really is like the Berlin Wall where the Westway is in London. And the downside of that, of course, is the kind of reputation that certain bridges have developed. I don't know if you've ever seen a documentary that won in Sundance a few years ago called The Bridge, which was about the Golden Gate, and it features the fact that that's actually the place where people in the States go to jump off when they decide they don't want to live anymore, which is a very tragic thing. But it's almost guaranteed that it works, as it were. And it's weird that something that's designed to connect people actually becomes a device for kind of removing yourself from the world. Something to think about, and the modifications that they've had to make to that bridge to kind of stop people from doing that.
Wow.
It's probably one of the most scary documentaries I've ever seen, called The Bridge. Worth looking at if you're interested in bridges, because it gives you a completely different perspective of what this means. But yeah, I think to me, the changes in materiality and what you might be able to span that maybe previously was technically not possible is interesting. But to me, I think the bridge that's on the screen now is particularly beautiful because it shows you connecting across a different kind of complex sort of urban landscape to maybe two sides of a city that would otherwise be completely disconnected. And I think really that's where they make the difference. Yeah.
I agree. And then touching upon what you said, I think we as architects or engineers sometimes do not consider how people might hack our design and use it the way that they see best. So with this one in particular, it just made me think, because one of the questions that I was having is if you have a bridge that is mainly designed for vehicles or for like public transportation, how do you make it a bit more intimate? And I feel like it answered it in a way that it is made still for people. You have, these seatings that people can use differently, whether it's for gymnastics or just to sit and look at the view. So that's really, really interesting to look at. I have been sent a questions privately from the audience. So one of these is that bridges are usually commissioned by the city. So how much can you push the boundaries of what the client is expecting, or of how a traditional bridge design is? I think we've seen a lot of different examples that you've showcased that are quite untraditional. Do you find it difficult to convince the city about it? Is it challenging, or how is it? If anyone would like.
Maybe I cut in. I think there's a variety of answers to that. No client is like the other. And for example, the bridge that I've shown before, that was a competition winning scheme. So the client knew what they wanted or what their constraints were, and they announced a competition where then they judged different designs against each other. Sometimes when we are very lucky, we can talk to the client before the brief is written, because the client usually has a particular brief in mind, solving a particular problem. For example, as we were showing in Ulm, crossing a railway no man's land. But quite often, only through a conversation with the client and asking the right question, we might actually find out that what they want is something completely different, or at least that the bridge that they want should respond to different factors rather than what they would write down. So every client is different, and quite often we have the chance to have the conversation and try to experiment with ideas. Sometimes we, especially when we join a design team later, it's more about trying to make a design that has already progressed into something that's still elegant, or what we call beautiful ordinary. So it fits into the background, it fits into the urban fabric. It is not loud. It doesn't necessarily need to be iconic. Usually, if clients think about an iconic bridge, they approach the architect first. But quite often we've got all the bridges that not many people speak about, which really have an impact on our lives. And in that case, there's still a conversation possible.
Of course, I agree. Cristiano, you've designed also a lot of different bridges, and I think mainly commissioned by the city. So how would you say this goes on about?
Well, I mean, the project in the Danjiang Bridge in Taiwan, that was won in competition. And Bart's point is important. You always need a client who knows what they want, and knows what they want for the right reason. Typically, most of us who work in this sector will work typically with two kinds of clients. One will be a public client and one will be a private client, which means the interests and the fundings are different. You know, institutional clients can either be privately or publicly funded. A bridge is typically a public project, which means it's subject to procurement roles that are driven by fixed rules of bidding, and by specific issues that are not so much driven by preference, but rather a priori how the brief is written. The issue then is, how do you convince the client that you have a preferred solution? In our case, it was the issue of the fact that we had the possibility of building one tower as opposed to two. The other one is then, in terms of the design, how can you convince the client that you have the capability to execute the design the way you want to? And that becomes more challenging, especially when you're doing something that that looks like what I'm putting on the screen here. I hope you can see that. I hope that's working. Can you guys see like a bunch of little white things?
Yep.
Okay, good. No, because my Zoom crashed twice and it's not behaving very well today. So these are studies that we can do relatively quickly on the computer in a kind of a cyclical bidirectional exchange with our engineers, because we set up the infrastructure, in this case in the cloud, working with an engineering platform by Dassault, which is what people make aircraft out of, which is CATIA, which means that we can engineer every nut and bolt on this bridge in a single common platform. That is the first step in trying to explain that what we're doing is not representational. It's actually kind of an accurate sort of three-dimensional, true virtual model of what we're going to build. When you have these complex models like this one that includes, you know, all the details, all the nuts and bolts, it's more than BIM. It's really a construction model at this point, from which I explained before that you can have all the simulations of rebars already integrated into that, right down to the individual details that allow us to, directly fabricate each component out of this. On top left, you see, for example, the anti-crash railing that Bart was talking about. What happens then is that normally we still have to execute, whoops, not this, is that we have to execute a series of drawings like you see here. And in the drawings are required because we still have rules of constructions and rules of tender procurement where everything is based on drawings that I sign, that I stamp. And in fact, what you want to do is people to work off a digital model, and that becomes difficult when you're working with a public client rather than a private client. Hence my point, because the level of innovation that you can have is much more difficult. So if we're working on the top right in that green environment of the shared 3D data within our design team, we're still required in the middle to produce, over 1,000 drawings for 1,500 drawings that are then used to tender the bridge, because that is what is required by public procurement, where then the government says the contractor has to build their own 3D model for which they're going to build. So, the chance that my 3D model and the contractor's 3D models are going to be the same is obviously pretty much zero. So what we spend a lot of time doing is convincing the government that we could build a kind of a legal wrapper around the model to allow them to sort of elevate the model to what, if you work with Boeing, what they will call authoritative data, which means that the data in the model itself is just not representational. It is actually the information, the instrument of contract, and that model can be handed off instead or alongside the drawings to the contractor, which has a number of advantages, which is that it speeds up engineering time, it reduces the amount of errors, and the contractor will probably give you a cheaper price because they don't have to spend 2 months rebuilding a model from scratch. So this kind of process is something that we've been working with a long time, that we had already developed back in Frank Gehry's office. Is something that provides you the framework to take an idea that might seem challenging and actually have a mechanism to execute it in a way that you can control. So the important thing here, I think, is that when you're working with particular kinds of clients, as the architect, you also need to be informed about what are the pathways to getting your job built. In this case, it has to do with really explaining to the Ministry of Transport of Taiwan how we want it to work and how we need it to work, so that they would then have the confidence, the information that is encapsulated in the original 3D data can be actually taken and built and executed in the model, right? And I think if we don't have that, the project now in construction, we're building the caissons where the foundations are going in. If we don't have that in place, we are in a much more challenging situation to be able to convincingly explain to the client that what we are proposing is actually achievable.
That's a very interesting approach and process. It's really, I feel like this is another webinar of itself.
Yeah, probably.
Super cool. Marijn, with you, most of the bridge designs are, I would say, for pedestrians. So do you find it's more that clients intervene, on a more personal level here?
Yes, absolutely. I think the restraints with pedestrian and bicycle bridge are a little less complex than with car bridges, I would say. And also, I think the level of on which you acquire the commission is most of our bridges is at a different level. So usually we are also, most of our bridges are, the commissions are being gained by competition, but the brief of the competition is usually a bit more free. So one bridge I can show you, a little thing is called the Daphne Schippersbrug in Utrecht. And what we won the competition actually by proposing to put a school which was more or less in the way underneath the bridge. So that wasn't part of the brief, but as you know that you need quite a long length to get to the height that you need to cross the canal. This usually generates a sort of not the most pleasant spaces in public space, the area underneath the bridge. And we proposed in the competition to put the existing school, to demolish it and put it underneath the bridge, and actually to use the inclination that we needed to create a lot of, let's say, more interesting and more defined public areas and safe areas for the kids to play. That actually, well, we gained that freedom in the competition, and by doing that we could win it and actually and build it in the end as well. So I think that's, well, of course, also this bridge, there are a lot of rules which you have to apply to, the inclination angle, the length that you might need, the safety bar around. But I think that for bicycle and pedestrian bridges, there's a little bit more freedom in it. But of course, it depends also depends of the place you're in, the municipality, and also the way how the tender is being organized.
I think the key in everything that you're showing, each and every different project and each one of you, the key is basically opening the eyes of the client to issues that they probably didn't think of. Like here, the safety, the school, the accessibility, in each and every one of them, you're discussing something that probably it wasn't in the brief. And I believe that that plays a role in convincing the client with going for that design.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's when we start our design process, it's always a sort of trying to find in the commission something which we could add to it, which is not basically questioned, but which could generate quality and bring more to it than only this sort of big infrastructure thing that's being put into a neighborhood. So how can you make it from a thing that's most of the time rejected by the people around it into something which they start to love?
Great, yeah. Thank you all. I mean, I'm afraid our time has come to an end. This has been really a wonderful discussion. Personally, for me, I've learned so much, and something that I didn't think I would really be not bored with, because originally when I saw bridges design, I just thought, what's there to it? But honestly, this has been an eye-opening discussion for me personally. I'm pretty sure for each and every one that watched as well and will be watching, since we're putting it on YouTube as well. Thank you all. Would anyone like to say anything in the end as we're wrapping up?
Maybe just a quick one where I absolutely agree with every one of you. When designing bridges, there's two items that are absolutely important. Number one is the collaboration with the engineers. You can't start early enough. So the best thing is you go to the site with the engineers, and then you go to a restaurant, sit down and start sketching on napkins. This is what usually, this is the bridge that we showed in Ulm, how it came by. The other thing is to make clear to the client, who quite often doesn't know. Most of the clients only come to build a bridge once in their lives. To make clear to them the importance of the structure that they're building, and make clear to them that how many generations after them will be living with this bridge. And if the bridge is good, it can end up on stamps or on emblems of a town, of a city. If a bridge is bad, it can destroy the community around it. It can have very negative effects, as Cristiano has mentioned. So it's absolutely important to talk to the client first and really make sure they understand the brief.
And listen to the community, as you were saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you all again. And on behalf of Cristiano, Bart, Marijn, and on behalf of myself and Shourouq, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us tonight. So tune in on the 22nd of December. Our next talk is going to be designing after temporary. So we see you then, and stay safe. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot.